The rumor spread through the American lines like wildfire in the summer of 1944. The Germans had a new supertank, 70 tons of steel and fury, armor so thick it could laugh at Sherman shells, a gun so powerful it could destroy anything the Allies fielded from over 2 kilometers away. Allied intelligence called it the Königstiger. German crews called it invincible. American tankers called it their worst nightmare. The first reports came from British forces fighting around Cachan in Normandy. On July 11, 1944, the 53rd Heavy Panzer Battalion deployed Königsteigers against Allied positions. British tank commanders radioed back descriptions that seemed impossible. Tanks larger than anything previously encountered, shells bouncing off frontal armor that appeared impenetrable, German tanks firing from ranges where British guns could not respond effectively. The psychological impact was immediate and severe. American intelligence officers compiled reports from multiple sources. British Second Army provided combat assessments. Soviet military intelligence shared information from the Eastern Front where Königsteigers had appeared. In August 1944, Free French resistance networks reported sightings of massive tanks being transported by rail through occupied France. Every account painted the same picture. Germany had deployed a new class of armored vehicle that outmatched anything the Allies possessed. For months, whispers had circulated about this mechanical monster. Reports filtered back from British units in Normandy. Soviet intelligence confirmed its existence on the Eastern Front. Every Allied tanker knew the statistics by heart. 180mm frontal armor on the turret, an 8.8 Sandy gun with a barrel over 6 meters long, a combat weight that exceeded anything on tracks. This was not just another tank. This was Germany's answer to Allied numerical superiority. A beast designed to restore German dominance on the battlefield. Allied tank crews studied intelligence briefings with growing apprehension. The technical specifications seemed designed to induce fear. The Königstiger weighed 69.8 tons, more than twice the weight of a Sherman. Its 8.8 cm KWK-43 gun could penetrate 150 meters of armor at 2,000 nanometer range. The sloped frontal armor, 180mm thick on the turret and 150mm on the hull front, could defeat virtually every Allied anti-tank weapon in service. The psychological impact was immediate. American tank crews who had grown accustomed to fighting Panzer IVs, and even the fearsome Panthers, now faced something entirely different. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. The Königstiger could penetrate the front armor of a Sherman from distances where return fire was impossible. It would take 4, maybe 5 Shermans to flank and destroy a single Königstiger, and casualties would be heavy. Sleep did not come easily to men who knew such a predator stalked the battlefield. Tank commanders shared stories from British crews who had encountered Königsteigers. One British officer reported watching his squadron's shells bounce harmlessly off a Königstiger's frontal armor at 800mm range. Another described a Königstiger destroying 3 Churchill tanks in rapid succession before withdrawing without receiving significant damage. These accounts circulated through Allied armored units, building a legend of invincibility around Germany's newest weapon. The fear was not irrational. Combat mathematics favored the Königstiger overwhelmingly in direct engagements. A Sherman 75mm gun could not penetrate a Königstiger's frontal armor at any practical combat range. Even the improved 76mm gun on later Sherman variants struggled against the Königstiger's thick-sloped plates. British 17-pounder guns stood a better chance, but only from favorable angles and at closer ranges where the Königstiger's superior reach gave German crews first-shot advantage. In early July 1944, elements of the elite Panzer Division received the first 5 Königsteigers allocated to Normandy. These tanks represented the cutting edge of German armored warfare. Each one cost 321,500 Reichsmarks, the equivalent of 3 smaller German tanks. Each one took production facilities that could have built 2 Panthers. These were not mass-produced weapons. These were precision instruments of destruction, hand-built with German engineering excellence, delivered to demonstrate German technological superiority at a time when the Reich desperately needed a miracle. The allocation of these 5 Königsteigers carried symbolic weight beyond their tactical value. Germany's armaments minister Albert Speer had promised increased production of heavy tanks to counter Allied numerical superiority. The Henschel factory in Kassel worked to fulfill orders for hundreds of Königsteigers, but production remained painfully slow. Skilled workers were scarce. Allied bombing disrupted supply chains. Critical materials like tungsten for armor-piercing ammunition and molybdenum for armor plate became increasingly difficult to obtain. Each completed King Tiger represented a triumph of German industrial determination against mounting odds. The crews selected to man these titans were equally elite veterans of the Eastern Front. Men who had survived Kursk, who had fought their way out of countless Soviet encirclements. They had been pulled from the desperate fighting in the East, specifically to form the core of the 316 remote control Panzer company attached to Panzer. Their confidence was absolute. They had seen what German armor could accomplish. They had watched Tigers tear through Soviet T-34 formations. Now they would demonstrate this superiority to the Americans and British. These veterans brought hard-earned expertise to their new assignment. They understood tank warfare at a level few Allied crews could match. They knew how to position their vehicles for maximum advantage. They understood the importance of terrain, of sight lines, of creating kill zones where enemy tanks would be destroyed before closing to effective range. Their experience made them dangerous opponents even in inferior vehicles. In King Tigers, they expected to be unstoppable. The moment they laid eyes on their new machines, these hardened veterans felt something shift. The King Tiger dwarfed everything around it, standing 3 m tall, stretching over 10 meters in length with its gun, weighing 69.8 tons, fully loaded. It dominated the landscape. The frontal armor sloped at angles that would deflect shells like rain. The gun, that magnificent 8.88cm KWK-43, promised death to anything foolish enough to enter its sight picture. This was not just a tank. This was a fortress on tracks, a weapon that would change the course of the war. The crews performed familiarization training on their new vehicles. They learned the peculiarities of the King Tiger's controls. The steering required more effort than lighter tanks. The transmission demanded careful shifting to avoid damage. The fuel consumption was staggering, burning through 190 gal to travel just 120 kilometers on roads. Off-road consumption was even worse. But these seemed like acceptable trade-offs for the overwhelming combat power the King Tiger provided. The orders came down in mid-July. The King Tigers would move from their assembly area to the front lines near Tilly and St. Lo. The journey was not far, perhaps 80 kilometers through French countryside. The crews performed their pre-combat checks with meticulous care as they had been trained. Oil levels, track tension, fuel, ammunition. Every system was verified, double-checked, certified, ready for combat. The mechanics gave their approval. The company commander reviewed the maintenance logs. Everything appeared perfect. These were brand new tanks, fresh from the Henschel factory, built with the finest German engineering. What could possibly go wrong? The first King Tiger began its journey with confidence. The Maybach HL230P30 engine roared to life, all 700 horsepower straining to move 70 tons of steel. The driver engaged the transmission, felt the tank lurch forward, and began navigating toward the front. Behind him, 4 more King Tigers followed, their commanders standing proud in their turrets, their crews eager to demonstrate German superiority. Then, barely 10 kilometers into the journey, the first breakdown occurred. The lead tank's transmission began making sounds that no mechanic wants to hear. Grinding metal on metal. The driver tried to compensate, shifting carefully, reducing speed. It made no difference. The gearbox, already stressed beyond its design limits by the tank's excessive weight, was failing. Within minutes, the King Tiger ground to a halt on a rural French road, blocking the entire column behind it. The crew dismounted in disbelief. This could not be happening, not now, not to Germany's most advanced tank. The commander ordered immediate repairs, but the mechanics quickly delivered devastating news. The transmission was catastrophically damaged. The internal gears had stripped. The tank would need to be towed back to a repair facility for a complete gearbox replacement. Moving it would require another King Tiger or a massive recovery vehicle. Neither was immediately available. The Maybach of 1216B transmission installed in the King Tiger was fundamentally the same design used in the 45-ton Panther. German engineers had not significantly strengthened the gearbox components to handle the additional 25 tons of weight. Under the stress of moving 70 tons, gear teeth stripped, bearings failed, and synchronizers wore out rapidly. This first breakdown was not an isolated manufacturing defect. It was a systemic design flaw. 1 down, 4 remaining. The column reorganized and continued. Surely this was an isolated incident, a manufacturing defect. Bad luck. The war could not be won by sitting still. The front lines were calling. American and British forces were grinding forward. Every hour mattered. The remaining 4 King Tigers pressed on. Their commanders now slightly less confident but still determined to reach combat. 15 kilometers further, the 2nd King Tiger began experiencing engine trouble. The Maybach engine, perfectly adequate for the 45-ton Panther tank, was desperately underpowered for 70 tons. The power-to-weight ratio was barely 10 horsepower per ton, far below what the tank needed for sustained operations. As the King Tiger climbed a modest hill, the engine temperature began rising. The cooling system, already marginal in design, could not cope with the excessive heat generated by an engine running at maximum output just to maintain basic speed. The driver watched his temperature gauges climb into the red zone. He reported the problem to his commander. They reduced speed, hoping to let the engine cool. It made no difference. The coolant was boiling. Steam began venting from the engine compartment. Within minutes, the overheated engine seized, the pistons expanding in their cylinders until they could no longer move. The tank coasted to a stop, smoke rising from the engine deck. German engineers had recognized the power deficit early in development. The Maybach HL230P30 generated 700 horsepower, identical to the engine in the much lighter Panther. Plans existed for an upgraded Maybach 234 fuel injection engine producing 800 horsepower, but production delays meant most King Tigers received the inadequate HL230. The result was predictable. Extended operations at high power output generated excessive heat, overwhelming the cooling system and causing cascading mechanical failures. 2 down, 3 remaining. Now the pattern was becoming clear, and panic began creeping into the minds of the remaining crews. These were not isolated incidents. These were systemic failures. The King Tiger, for all its impressive armor and firepower, had a fatal flaw. It was too heavy for its own drivetrain. The engine, transmission, and cooling system were all operating beyond their design specifications. What looked invincible on the test range became a liability on campaign. The 3rd tank made it another 20 kilometers before its final drive failed. The massive gears that connected the transmission to the drive sprockets simply could not handle the torque required to move 70 tons across variable terrain. The teeth stripped. The drivetrain seized. The tank stopped moving, its crew staring at each other in growing horror. The final drive problem would plague King Tigers throughout their service life. A report from Schwerpanzerabteilung 506 in September 1944 documented the crisis in detail. 12 final drive housings failed after only 50 to 100 kilometers of operation. Sprocket teeth sheared off under load. Track tension devices broke repeatedly. The battalion commander requested an urgent meeting with armaments officials to address the catastrophic failure rate. 3 down, 2 remaining. By now, the company commander was facing an impossible situation. Of 5 King Tigers that had departed that morning, only 2 remained operational, and they had not even reached the front lines yet. They had not fired a shot. They had not faced a single enemy tank. They had simply tried to drive 80 kilometers on roads, and 60% of the force had mechanically disintegrated. The commander made the only decision he could. He ordered the remaining 2 tanks to proceed at reduced speed, nursing their overworked engines, praying their transmissions would hold together just long enough to reach friendly lines. Behind him lay 3 of Germany's most advanced tanks, immobilized not by enemy action, but by their own engineering. The 4th King Tiger failed 30 kilometers from the front. Suspension problems. The overlapping road wheel design intended to distribute the tank's massive weight proved prone to damage. A wheel bearing seized. The wheel locked. The track threw itself off the drive sprocket. The tank lurched to a halt, tilting slightly to one side, completely immobilized. 4 down, 1 remaining. 1 single King Tiger from the original 5 actually reached German positions near Tilly. 1 out of 5, a 20% success rate. The crew of that lone survivor looked back at the trail of broken machines behind them and understood a terrible truth. Germany's super tank was not super at all. It was over-engineered, underestimated, and fundamentally flawed. But the story does not end there. The fate of these 5 King Tigers reflected a larger pattern that would repeat across multiple theaters. These particular tanks, chassis numbers 28001 through 28005, were the very first King Tigers produced, manufactured in March 1944 and equipped with early production Porsche turrets. They had been allocated to the 316 Funklank Panzer Company, a specialized unit equipped with radio-controlled demolition vehicles operated from Tiger tanks. The unit's intended role was breaching fortifications using remote-controlled explosive charges. When the unit deployed to Normandy in June 1944, the 5 King Tigers remained at Chateau-d'Un, roughly 200 kilometers from the front. They were deemed too unreliable for combat operations. The unit commander, facing urgent operational demands, made the practical decision to re-equip with 9 Sturmwitz assault guns instead. These were available, reliable, and immediately useful. The King Tigers sat unused, monuments to wasted resources. By mid-August 1944, as Allied forces swept through France, these 5 abandoned King Tigers became a liability. German forces could not repair them. They lacked the heavy recovery equipment needed to tow 70-ton vehicles. They had no spare parts for the complex drivetrains. The decision was made to destroy the tanks, rather than allow them to fall into Allied hands. Demolition charges were placed. Turrets were blown off their rings and the hulks were left beside French roads. Within days, American forces advancing through the area began encountering these abandoned King Tigers. The first crews to spot them approached with extreme caution, expecting ambush, expecting fire from those feared 8.8 centimeter guns. Instead, they found silence. Empty tanks, hatches open, crews long gone. The Germans, unable to recover or repair these monsters, had simply destroyed what they could and abandoned the rest. American tankers could not believe what they were seeing. They had been told these machines were invincible. They had been warned that encountering a King Tiger meant almost certain death. Yet here they sat, lifeless, defeated not by American guns but by German engineering. The first intact King Tiger captured by American forces became an intelligence goldmine. Technical intelligence teams from First Army arrived with cameras, measuring devices, and cutting equipment. Engineers from the Ordnance Department joined them. British liaison officers contributed expertise. The examination would take days and produce reports that circulated through Allied command structures. Engineers and technical specialists crawled over every centimeter of the Techling's tickly abandoned vehicle. They wanted to understand everything about this machine. They needed to know its capabilities, its weaknesses, and how to defeat it. What they discovered shocked them to their core. The armor was indeed impressive. 180mm at the turret front sloped at 80 degrees from vertical. 50mm on the hull front sloped at 50 degrees. This was armor that could resist virtually every American and British tank gun in service. Shells that would have penetrated a Panther simply bounced off the King Tiger's glacis plate. From the front, this tank was nearly invincible. Test firings against captured armor plates confirmed that standard 75mm Sherman rounds could not penetrate at any range. Even the improved 76mm rounds struggled against the thick-sloped armor. The gun was equally impressive. The 8.8cm KWK-43 could penetrate 5 in of armor at 2,000-meter range. This was a weapon that outranged, outgunned, and outclassed every Allied tank cannon. In a direct gunnery duel at long range, the King Tiger had every advantage. The gun used separate loading ammunition with the projectile and propellant charge loaded independently. This slowed the rate of fire compared to single-piece ammunition, but allowed for much higher muzzle velocities and greater penetration. American engineers measured the barrel length at 6.3 meters over 71 times the caliber. They examined the breech mechanism, the recoil system, and the mounting. Everything was built to exceptional standards. The optics impressed them particularly. German Zeiss range-finding equipment and gun sights were acknowledged as the finest in the world. A King Tiger crew could identify and engage targets at ranges where Allied tanks could barely see them. But then the engineers began examining the drivetrain and understanding dawned. The transmission was the same basic design used in the Panther, a tank that weighed 25 tons less. The gears were not significantly stronger. The bearings were not notably larger. German engineers had essentially taken a transmission designed for a medium tank and expected it to handle the loads of a super-heavy tank. The result was predictable. Under sustained operation, the transmission components would fail. Engineers found physical evidence of this throughout the captured vehicle. Wear patterns on gear teeth showed excessive loading. Bearing races showed scoring and spoiling. The synchronizer rings were worn thin. An American mechanical engineer from Detroit who examined the transmission wrote in his report that no automobile manufacturer in America would have approved this drivetrain for a vehicle of this weight. The design margins were simply inadequate. The engine situation was even worse. The Maybach HL230P30 produced 700 horsepower, perfectly adequate for the 45-ton Panther, but in a 70-ton King Tiger, that same engine was desperately struggling. King Tiger, that same engine was desperately struggling. The power-to-weight ratio was barely 10 horsepower per ton. By comparison, the American Sherman at 30 tons with a 400 horsepower engine achieved over 13 horsepower per ton. The King Tiger was actually less mobile than the tank it was designed to dominate. American engineers calculated fuel consumption based on tank capacity and reported operational ranges. The numbers were staggering. The King Tiger carried 860 L of fuel in its internal tanks. This provided approximately 120 km of road range under ideal conditions. Off-road range was significantly less, perhaps 80 to 90 km. Combat operations with frequent maneuvering, acceleration, and high power demands could drain the tanks in less than 60 km. For comparison, a Sherman carried 660 L and could travel 200 km on roads. The King Tiger needed 30% more fuel to travel 40% less distance. The logistics implications were devastating. A German armored column containing King Tigers would need nearly double the fuel trucks of a comparable American formation. In 1944, when Germany faced critical fuel shortages, this disadvantage was crippling. The cooling system could not cope with sustained operations. Engineers examined the radiators, coolant passages, and cooling fan. Everything was adequately designed for normal operations, but the King Tiger rarely operated normally. The underpowered engine ran at high output constantly, generating excessive heat. The radiators could not dissipate heat fast enough. The coolant would boil, pressure would build, gaskets would fail, and the engine would seize. Evidence from the Eastern Front supported these findings. Soviet forces had captured 2 King Tigers in August 1944 near Sandom in Poland. These tanks were transported to the Kubinka proving ground near Moscow for detailed testing and evaluation. Soviet engineers subjected the King Tigers to the same rigorous testing they applied to their own vehicles. The Soviet testing program revealed the depth of the King Tiger's mechanical problems. During transfer to Kubinka, both captured tanks suffered multiple breakdowns. The cooling system proved insufficient for hot weather operations. Engine temperatures exceeded safe limits repeatedly. One tank's gearbox failed completely during the journey. The other's right suspension required complete replacement, and full functionality could not be restored even with German spare parts captured alongside the vehicles. Once at Kubinka, Soviet engineers conducted systematic trials. They drove the King Tigers across various terrain types, measured fuel consumption, tested maximum speed, and evaluated reliability. The results were damning. The tank broke down every 10 to 15 kilometers in hot weather. The cooling system consistently failed when ambient temperatures exceeded 30 degrees C. The gearbox overheated due to insufficient cooling and the hot external environment. Soviet engineers tested the King Tiger's armor by firing captured German 88mm guns at it. They discovered that the King Tiger's own gun could penetrate the turret of another King Tiger at 400mm range. While this demonstrated the power of the gun, it also revealed that the armor, while thick, was not as invincible as propaganda suggested. The welding quality was noted as significantly worse than comparable German designs like the Tiger one, despite careful German workmanship. The final drive, connecting transmission to tracks, was another critical weakness that both American and Soviet testing confirmed. The gears had to transmit enormous torque to move 70 tons. Under the stresses of combat maneuvering, turning in place, reversing quickly, these components failed with alarming regularity. Multiple captured King Tigers showed evidence of final drive failure. The problem was so severe that German field commanders issued directives warning Tiger crews against unnecessary maneuvering that would stress the final drives. American engineers compiled their findings into detailed technical reports. Intelligence Bulletin Number 44 issued by First Army in September 1944 contained extensive technical data on the King Tiger. The report circulated through Allied armored units, providing tank commanders with accurate information about German capabilities and vulnerabilities. The conclusion was remarkable. The King Tiger, while formidable in direct combat, was its own worst enemy. Its excessive weight made it a maintenance nightmare. Its underpowered engine limited strategic mobility. Its complex transmission required constant attention. Its suspension clogged with mud, especially in winter conditions when freezing. Temperatures locked the overlapping wheels solid. The intelligence assessment concluded that a properly positioned King Tiger in a defensive ambush was extremely dangerous. Its gun and armor gave it decisive advantages, But a King Tiger on the offensive, maneuvering across country, advancing for hours or days, would likely break down before engaging the enemy. The longer the advance, the higher the breakdown rate. The more complex the terrain, the more stress on already overtaxed systems. This understanding changed American tactical doctrine immediately. Instead of fearing the King Tiger as an invincible predator, commanders now understood it as a powerful but fragile weapon. The solution was not to engage it frontally in a gunnery duel. The solution was to force it to move, to advance, to maneuver. Every kilometer it traveled increased the chance of mechanical failure. Every hill it climbed stressed its engine. Every turn wore down its transmission. American forces also learned that King Tigers, because of their weight, could not cross most bridges. They were too heavy for standard military bridging equipment. Engineers calculated that the King Tiger's ground pressure, despite its wide tracks, was still substantial. Bridges rated for 50 tons would not support a 70-ton tank. Rivers that other German tanks could afford were impossible barriers. This meant King Tiger movements were constrained to specific routes, making them predictable and vulnerable to air attack. The fuel consumption was staggering compared to Allied vehicles. A King Tiger burned through 190 gall to travel just 120 km on roads. Off-road, the consumption was even worse, sometimes reaching twice that rate. By comparison, a Sherman could travel over 200 kilometers on similar fuel. This meant King Tigers required massive logistical support, a supply train Germany simply could not maintain by late 1944. Perhaps most telling was the production bottleneck. Germany built just 492 King Tigers during the entire war. Production began in January 1944 and continued until March 1945. Just one tank in 1943, 379 in 1944, 112 in 1945, before production ceased. Compare this to the 35,000 Panzer produced, or the 6,000 Panthers, or the 50,000 Shermans built by America alone. For the resources consumed by one King Tiger, Germany could have built 3 Panthers or 5 Panzer IVs. The mathematics of industrial warfare were unforgiving. Allied strategic bombing contributed significantly to the low production numbers. Royal Air Force Bomber Command targeted the Henschel factory in Kassel repeatedly throughout 1944. Raids in September and October destroyed machine tools, disrupted assembly lines, and killed skilled workers. Production fell from over 100 King Tigers per month in summer 1944 to just 30 per month by year's end. Each bombing raid set production back weeks as workers cleared rubble, repaired machinery, and re-established workflow. The Schwerhus Panzerabteil 501 arrived on the Eastern Front in August 1944 with 45 King Tigers. Only 8 were operational when they reached the battlefield. 37 had broken down during transit. 37 brand new tanks fresh from the factory, mechanically defeated before firing a shot. This was not an army preparing for victory. This was an army watching its most advanced weapons disintegrate from internal failures. The battalion had entrained at Padborn on August 5, 1944. Bound for southeastern Poland, the journey covered roughly 800 km by rail. Even rail transport proved problematic. King Tigers were too heavy for many railway cars. Special heavy-duty flat cars were required. Loading and unloading required specialized ramps. The weight distribution had to be carefully managed to prevent car failure. Several King Tigers were damaged during loading when ramps collapsed under the excessive weight. After draining near the Vistula River, the battalion attempted a 50-kilometer road march to their assigned positions. This relatively short movement became a disaster. Final drive failures occurred first. Tanks ground to a halt as drive sprockets failed under load. Then transmissions began failing. Gear synchronizers broke, bearings seized, clutches burned out. Within 2 days of beginning the road march, 37 of 45 King Tigers were immobilized, awaiting repair. The 8 operational King Tigers that did reach the front lines immediately entered combat against Soviet forces attempting to expand their bridgehead at Barono Sandys. On August 11th and 12th, 1944, these King Tigers engaged T-3485s in close-range combat around the town of Uglando. 3 King Tigers were destroyed in an ambush. Soviet tanks firing from concealed positions hit the King Tigers from the side where armor was thinner. Ammunition explosions killed most of the crew members. This engagement led to a tactical change. German armored doctrine had stored main gun ammunition in the turret for easy crew access. The Oglandau losses demonstrated that turret hits could cause catastrophic ammunition fires. After this battle, King Tiger stored all main gun ammunition in hull racks, reducing the ready rounds, but greatly improving crew survival in the event of turret penetration. The modification reduced ammunition capacity from 84 rounds to 68 rounds. By March 1945, German records show that King Tigers achieved a 59% operational readiness rate. This meant that at any given time, nearly half the force was broken down awaiting repair. Statistics compiled on March 15, 1945 showed King Tigers at 59% readiness compared to 62% for the Panzer IV and 48% for the Panther. The King Tiger was actually more reliable than the Panther by war's end, though still substantially worse than older, simpler designs. This improvement came from hard-learned experience. Henschel engineers worked closely with field units to identify and address mechanical problems. Modified seals reduced oil leaks, improved gaskets, prevented coolant loss. Strengthened drivetrain components lasted longer under load. A new track design with wider links distributed weight better. Improved driver training reduced mechanical abuse. Better maintenance procedures caught problems before they became failures. By early 1945, the King Tiger was a far more reliable vehicle than the early production models. But by then, Germany lacked the fuel, spare parts, and industrial capacity to maintain even this improved readiness rate. The Battle of the Bulge provided the ultimate test case for King Tiger reliability under operational conditions. Kampfgruppe Piper, spearheading the German offensive in December 1944, had approximately 45 King Tigers from Schwer SS Panzer Teilung 501 attached to the 1st SS Panzer Division. The plan called for a rapid advance to seize bridges over the Meuse River, cutting off Allied forces and capturing fuel depots to sustain the offensive. Kampfgruppe Piper crossed into Belgium on December 16, 1944, advancing through the Lachim Gap. The force included roughly 4,800 soldiers, 600 vehicles, and the attached King Tigers. The advance began promisingly. American defenses were thinly spread. Resistance was light initially. Piper's column seized the town of Hansfeld and captured an American fuel dump, refueling his vehicles. But mechanical problems began immediately. Approximately 12 King Tigers never left the assembly area due to mechanical failures before the offensive even started. The remaining tanks accompanied Piper's advance toward Stavolo, where his force captured a bridge over the Inlave River on December 18th. From there, the advance continued toward Leys, a small Belgian village that would become Piper's final position. Only 6 King Tigers successfully reached Leys with Piper. The others had broken down en route or been left to guard key positions at Stavolo and Thuin. Tank number 213 was among those 6, commanded by SS Obermführer Helmuth Dollinger. Dollinger's original tank had broken down, so he assumed command of 213, which had been crewed by SS Chauffour Franz Fastman. The King Tigers were positioned around Lilles to defend against the inevitable American counterattack. Tank 213, along with Tank 221, commanded by SS Unmurer Georg Hanusch, took up positions at Wiemont Farm on high ground south of Lilles. Their commanding position overlooked the road from Trance, providing excellent fields of fire against approaching American forces. On December 21, 1944, American forces attacked. Task Force Major and Task Force Lovelady of the 3rd Armored Division advanced up the valley with approximately 25 tanks. The King Tigers opened fire at extreme range, roughly $2,000 a meter. At that distance, the American tank guns could not respond effectively. The King Tigers had overwhelming advantage, but the Americans kept coming, using terrain for cover, advancing in bounds, closing the range. Return fire intensified. An American round struck Tank 213's main gun barrel, damaging it severely so the weapon could not be fired. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some accounts suggest a lucky shot struck the barrel directly. Others indicate the tank was doomed hit multiple times until accumulated damage made the gun unusable. Regardless of the specific mechanism, Tank 213 was rendered combat ineffective. Dollinger suffered a head wound during the engagement, likely from shell fragments penetrating the crew compartment. He took cover in the cellar of Wiemont Farm while his crew attempted repairs. But by then, Kampfgruppe Piper's situation had become desperate. Cut off from supply lines, nearly out of fuel and ammunition, surrounded by American forces, Piper had no options remaining. On December 23rd, Piper received permission to withdraw, but withdrawal in armored vehicles was impossible. The King Tigers and other heavy vehicles were completely out of fuel. Piper made the only decision available. The force would withdraw on foot, abandoning all heavy equipment. Approximately 800 men escaped the encirclement during the night of December 23rd into December 24th, moving cross-country to reach German lines near Wani. 770 survivors eventually linked up with their parent division. Behind them, Lay Paper's force abandoned 135 armored vehicles, 6 King Tigers, 13 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, over 50 half-tracks and other vehicles. Demolition teams attempted to destroy the equipment, but time was limited and American forces were closing in. Many vehicles, including Tank 213, were captured largely intact. After the battle, American recovery teams moved through Laz, removing abandoned German equipment. Tank 213 proved difficult to recover due to its position on the narrow farm road. In July 1945, the U.S. Army prepared to tow it away for scrapping. Jenny Jeanendeuse, owner of a local cafe, intervened. She reportedly offered American soldiers a bottle of cognac in exchange for the tank. Her motivation was preservation. She believed the tank should remain in Lays as a memorial to the village's wartime suffering. The Americans agreed. Tank 213 was moved to the village square in front of the church. It remained there for years, slowly deteriorating, until local preservation efforts began in 1951. Parts of the damaged gun barrel were replaced using sections from Panther tanks abandoned nearby in 1975. The tank underwent complete restoration and repainting. It was then moved to its current position outside the December 44th Museum, where it remains the only King Tiger still displayed on its original battlefield in Europe. Another King Tiger, tank number 332, has an equally well-documented history. This tank came from Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 501 and was abandoned near Petit Coup in Belgium on December 24, 1944. Sergeant Glenn, George of the 740th Tank Battalion, discovered the intact tank while on patrol. His unit was attached to the 82nd Airborne Division, defending the northern shoulder of the Bulge. Tank 332 was in remarkably good condition despite being abandoned. The crew had attempted to destroy it before withdrawing, but American arrival prevented complete demolition. The tank was recovered by the 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company and transported to Spar, Belgium, then shipped through Antwerp to the United States. Tank 332 arrived at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed examination. American engineers subjected it to the same scrutiny they had given earlier captures. They measured, photographed, tested, and documented every aspect of the vehicle. The tank remained at Aberdeen for approximately 40 years, displayed outdoors where weather gradually deteriorated its condition. In August 1991, Tank 332 was transferred to Fort Knox, Kentucky, for display at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor. To create a cutaway educational exhibit, technicians cut open the left side of the hull, exposing the interior layout, ammunition stowage, and mechanical systems. This allowed museum visitors to see inside a King Tiger, understanding how the crew operated and how the various systems functioned. Tank 332 later moved to Fort Benning, Georgia, where it remains in the U.S. Army Armor and Cavalry Collection. It is the only intact King Tiger captured by American forces during World War II. The psychological impact on German tank crews was devastating. These men had been promised an invincible war machine that would restore German battlefield dominance. Instead, they received a mechanical liability that broke down constantly, consumed fuel at ruinous rates, and required specialized recovery equipment that rarely existed. The gap between propaganda and reality demoralized even veteran crews. For American tankers, the evolution in thinking was remarkable. In July 1944, the mere mention of a King Tiger caused fear. Intelligence briefings painted it as nearly unstoppable. Combat reports from British units described it as invincible. Every rumor made it more terrifying. By December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, American crews had learned the truth. Yes, the King Tiger was dangerous in direct combat, but it was also likely to be out of fuel, broken down, or abandoned by its crew after mechanical failure. The invincible monster had been revealed as a flawed weapon system. American after-action reports from the Bulge noted that more King Tigers were found abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion than were actually destroyed by Allied fire. Tank crews reported finding King Tigers beside roads with tracks thrown, engines seized, or transmissions failed. Engines seized or transmissions failed. Some had been abandoned with minor damage that would have been easily repaired on more reliable vehicles. But the King Tiger's complexity made field repairs nearly impossible without specialized equipment and trained technicians. The technical interrogations of captured German tank crews revealed the depth of the problem. Drivers reported that the gearbox required constant careful shifting to avoid damage, any aggressive maneuvering, any emergency situation requiring rapid speed changes risked transmission failure. Commanders reported that they could not rely on their tanks to complete long-distance movements. Every march required factoring in breakdowns and recovery operations. Maintenance personnel revealed that repairing a King Tiger required specialized tools, rare parts, and skilled technicians. A thrown track on a Sherman could be fixed by the crew in an hour using basic tools and manpower. A thrown track on a King Tiger with its overlapping road wheels and complex suspension could take a full day with specialized equipment. The overlapping wheel design meant that replacing an inner wheel required removing multiple outer wheels first. In winter, mud and ice froze between the wheels, making maintenance nearly impossible under field conditions. A failed transmission meant complete replacement, a job requiring heavy lifting equipment and multiple days of work. The transmission weighed over half a ton. Removing it required specialized jacks and hoists. Installing the replacement required precise alignment and careful adjustment. Most field maintenance units lacked the equipment and expertise to perform this work. A King Tiger with transmission failure usually had to be towed to a rear area workshop, assuming a recovery vehicle capable of moving 70 tons was available. The final lesson came from production statistics that told the story of industrial capacity determining victory. Germany expended the industrial resources of 3 medium tanks to produce 1 King Tiger. America built 11 Shermans in the same time with similar resources. For every King Tiger Germany fielded, America fielded 11 Shermans, all of which were more reliable, easier to maintain, and actually capable of reaching the battlefield. American factories produced tanks at rates Germany could not match. The Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit, Michigan, built over 18,000 Sherman tanks between 1942 and 1945. A single American factory produced more tanks than all German King Tiger production. Ford Motor Company built over 1,000 Sherman tanks per month at peak production. General Motors, American Locomotive Company, and other manufacturers added tens of thousands more. This production advantage extended beyond raw numbers. American factories could replace losses rapidly. A destroyed Sherman could be replaced in weeks. A destroyed King Tiger could not be replaced at all in the war's final months as production collapsed. American logistics could deliver replacement tanks to frontline units efficiently. German logistics struggled to deliver fuel to existing tanks, let alone replacement vehicles. The Americans who captured and studied these machines took away lessons that shaped post-war tank development: reliability over raw power, simplicity over sophistication, sustainability over capability. These principles guided American armored vehicle design for decades. The M48, M60, and M1 Abrams all prioritized reliability and maintainability as core requirements. Lessons learned from examining German over-engineering. American tank designers recognized that the most powerful gun was worthless if the tank could not reach the battlefield. The thickest armor provided no protection if the tank broke down before encountering the enemy. The most advanced technology meant nothing if field mechanics could not maintain it. These fundamental truths learned from studying the King Tiger's failures became bedrock principles of American military vehicle design. The King Tiger remains famous today, featured in films, video games, and popular culture as the ultimate German tank. That reputation is not entirely wrong. In direct combat, properly positioned, adequately supplied, the King Tiger was indeed fearsome. British tanker Ken II, who fought in Normandy, described encountering a King Tiger as terrifying. The massive size, the thick armor, the powerful gun, all combined to create a weapon that dominated any engagement where it could be brought to bear effectively. But that scenario represented a tiny fraction of actual war. The much more common scenario was the one those first 5 tanks experienced in July 1944. Long marches, mechanical stress, inadequate logistics, inevitable breakdown. Of the 492 King Tigers produced, the vast majority were lost to mechanical failure, fuel exhaustion, or abandonment rather than combat destruction. This was not the weapon that changed the war. This was a weapon that symbolized Germany's inability to match Allied industrial power. For the American soldiers who discovered those first abandoned King Tigers in the summer of 1944, the experience was transformative. They had been afraid of German technological superiority. They had worried that they were outmatched. Then they found the reality. The most advanced German tank could not complete an 80-kilometer road march without catastrophic mechanical failure. The invincible superweapon could not reach the battlefield under its own power. The answer to Germany's fate became obvious. A nation that could not build reliable tanks, could not fuel its armies, could not maintain its equipment, could not win a war of industrial attrition against the combined might of America, Britain and the Soviet Union. The broken King Tigers proved it beyond doubt. Those abandoned tanks served as powerful symbols. American industrial might and mechanical reliability had defeated German technological sophistication. The war would be won not by who had the best tank, but by who had the most tanks that actually worked. That lesson, paid for in blood across multiple continents, would shape military thinking for generations. The King Tiger's true legacy was not its brief moments of combat effectiveness, but its demonstration that sophisticated engineering without reliable execution was ultimately worthless. That was the real story of the King Tiger. Story of the King Tiger.